All right. Hey, welcome to the podcast today. I'm Sean La Rue with Neo Home Loans. I'm having a great day, and I hope you are too. Today, we have a great episode. We're going to be talking about community property and what that looks like getting into and out of a marriage. We're joined today with Jonathan Roeder with the Valley Law Group. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Now, Jonathan, we'd like to highlight some local businesses here in Phoenix and Arizona. And I work a little bit here in Arizona and in California. And both states are community property states. And tell us a little bit about what you and your law firm do for your clients.
All right. As you stated, my law firm is the Valley Law Group. Currently, we practice exclusively in family and domestic relations or divorces. We also do juvenile work. So anything related to the family, we can handle everything from complex dependency issues where like the Department of Child Safety are taking, kids away from parents, everything within the gambit of the family court, as well as we do handle court of appeals cases as well. And we are currently in the process of initiating criminal law into our practice.
Very cool. Awesome. And we're talking at some family events recently, and I'm like, hey, you've got some great content. You're an expert in this field. And we had a conversation the other day, and from my experience, what I've recently been going through, I have one perspective, and we're talking about divorce and what that looks like and how to prepare for that. And you just took it in a different direction, which I love because your perspective is like you don't really have to worry about the divorce when we're talking about setting up the marriage right. And so I really like that perspective because anytime you're getting into a contract, it's good to know what you're signing, getting advice based on your current situation. Um, so expand on that a little bit for me and what you think. I mean, we talked about like three major topics that we'll kind of get into, but why did that come to mind? First of all, looking at getting into an agreement or a marriage versus looking at it as you're trying to get divorced.
Okay, yeah. Well, for my law firm, we're a high volume practice. We're one of the larger family law firms in the state, so we do a ton of divorces. Okay, and with divorce rates at what they are, broaching nearly half of all marriages end in divorce. It's important to at least have an understanding of what happens during a divorce, what happens with assets and debts and things like that. We are a community property state, and for the most part, a lot of people know what that is, but they don't necessarily have done their homework in terms of how like things like real estate apply to community property rules, because it's a little bit different depending on the situation. And I think going into a marriage, there needs to be more communication between the parties to understand what their expectations are. And a lot of people don't do that. So when it comes to how you're going to split your assets and debts in during a divorce, they don't they have completely different different things that they want out of the divorce, and they didn't necessarily have any communication prior to going into that to understand how it would affect them.
Right. So you're saying that because Arizona is a community property state, there's lots of things that are triggered through the divorce situation. But if we're able to openly talk about finances, prenuptial agreements, what that might look like if, you needed to exit that agreement, and how to divide those assets, it's better to talk about that up front rather than worrying about it or trying to negotiate over it if the relationship might go south, right?
Correct. And to be frank, a lot of people don't even know the financial situations of their soon to be spouse going into the marriage.
Right.
Um, you know, if you're not clear about what expectations are, what kind of debts you're going into the marriage with, what kind of assets you're going into the marriage with, the expectations of the parties could be completely different from one another. And, communication, right, is a major aspect of why people get divorced, but so is finances. So having that type of communication just puts you in better footing, um, even if there isn't a divorce, right? It's the conflict that occurs during the marriage that could potentially lead to divorce.
Right. It's the ability to have the open conversation so you know what you're getting into. Let's say, for example, one party in the relationship has a bunch of credit card debt, and that's not communicated to the other party that um, that there's no plan going into the marriage of what's to be expected. That's the biggest issue is not discussing it, is what you're saying.
Right. So, if I was getting married and my soon to be wife had $50,000 in credit card debt, what's the expectation now that we get married and all the money that we're making during the marriage is community, but I make 10 times as much as you do and I'm paying down most of that. Am I expected to get money back? Well, with community property rules, no, but my expectation might have been different in my own mind rather than what would have played out in a legal setting. So yes, having that conversation is important because it doesn't only affect the person that has the debt; it affects the community too. Like you have $50,000 in credit card debt. I was expecting that 6 months after our marriage we would be able to go buy a house, but now I can't buy a house because you got too much debt. We don't
Right.
qualify with that debt. So
Right. And I think you hit the nail on the head in our other conversation that we had, which was, when you're talking about entering into a marriage, you're all lovey-dovey, it's all good. You really have the best interest in your partner to, get out from under the credit card debt. Um, and what you said was, I think, having a prenuptial agreement, having a prenup is a really good way of kind of setting those expectations, which kind of brings us to our next point, and you can kind of lay out like what those expectations are. So I know a prenup has kind of a negative connotation, but basically what you're telling me, it's a way to be completely transparent and really set the expectation for your partnership so that hopefully you're on even ground with those expectations, and if those expectations are broken, that you kind of have a safety net. So let's say in this example your partner has, or I have in my partnership, $50,000 in credit card debt. Would you be able to set that out in detail on a prenup that the community is paying towards this debt, and if something happens that I'm given a credit or something? Like you can state that in the prenup, right?
yes, yes. So we do a lot of prenups with our firm, and they can honestly be as creative as you want them to be, as detailed as you want them to be. Now, in a community property state like ours, pre-marriage debt isn't a community debt. Okay, so naturally, it's going to be the sole and separate debt of the other party. And just because you got married doesn't automatically mean that the community is responsible for that debt upon divorce. However, if there is an expectation that if community money is paying down that debt over time and you want to reimburse, yes, then yeah, you would put that in some type of contract, prenup, or postnuptial agreement that would define how much the community has to, get paid back.
So so the prenup can be as detailed as you want it. You can have any and all kinds of agreements, and as long as they're agreed to, that's basically setting the expectation. Is what I'm hearing you say.
Uh, kind of. I wouldn't use the word any and all because prenups you can't put stuff about children in there, right? Because
Okay.
courts always protect the best interests of children. They're not going to let you bargain for parenting time in contemplation of divorce. Okay. But financially, yes, you can pretty much put, whatever you want to contract with regard to the finances. There's only a few like safeguards where the state can overrule what you put in that contract, particularly with like spousal maintenance. If, for instance, if you put in a prenup that the parties are going to waive any spousal maintenance claims from the other. The state, in certain situations, can overrule that, and make someone pay spousal maintenance if the other party is going to have to take state services, like TAMP benefits, food stamps, access, etc., because that's taxpayer dollars going to that. There's only a finite amount of money that they can, put into those social services. So they're not going to make a taxpayer pay it over you as a spouse. So they
Okay.
can overrule it on that part, but outside of that, they're pretty much going to enforce what you put in that contract.
So I hear two different examples. One is where you have husband and partner, and they're both employed, gainfully employed. You can have an agreement in the prenup that there's no spousal maintenance as long as during the exit they're both gainfully employed. The state's probably not going to intervene.
Correct.
Okay. Option B is you have a stay-at-home parent and another partner who's working full time, and that's going to put the other partner in kind of a bad situation. Maybe they'll have to qualify for state kind of benefits, and at that point, the state would step in and probably overrule the prenup for spousal maintenance and kind of give them some benefits so that they're not laboring taxpayers.
Correct. Exactly.
Cool. Um, and then I think we had a couple topics here about home ownership, community property. Obviously, that's what this channel is about real estate and home loans. So, when you're buying property together in Arizona or any community property state, um, obviously that ownership is part of the community. How does it work if you have property purchased prior to the marriage?
Okay, so property purchased prior to the marriage is sole and separate property. Okay, so you purchase that, and you get married, or so you purchase it prior to the marriage. You get married, you still own the property. Okay, and you're about to get a divorce. Well, it still remains your sole and separate property, but it doesn't mean that the other party is not entitled to some type of percentage of the equity that accumulated during the marriage. Okay. Now, when I say that, people are confused. Well, I bought it prior to the marriage. I used my own money, but they don't realize that, let's say you've been married 8 years. Well, if you're using community funds to pay down your mortgage on that property, right? Even if it's from me working, right? That money that I'm working, if you don't have a prenup in place, that's community funds. So if you're using community funds to pay down a mortgage of a separate property, it would be unfair to not get anything out of it because community is paying it down. So we use a formula. It's called a Dreyhus-Barnett formula to determine what percentage of the appreciation and value during the marriage due to you paying down the mortgage with community funds the community is entitled to. And it doesn't. Some people think, well, that only applies to when you purchase property prior to the marriage, but it also applies to when you buy it during the marriage. Now, in a community property state, it's usually a presumption that any assets or debts that you incur during the marriage is community. Well, with real estate, that's not necessarily always the case because I'll give a scenario of a stay-at-home mother, right? You guys want to a husband and a stay-at-home mother want to purchase a house together. They're already married. Well, because of, let's say, the credit of that stay-at-home mother, or the fact that she's not gainfully employed, putting her on the loan would be a detriment because of the interest rate, right? You're not going to get a favorable interest rate. Well, in a situation like that, if one party was a married couple were to purchase a property, but one of the parties wasn't going to be on the note, well, the lender is going to make them sign a disclaimer deed, right? That disclaimer is going to basically say that the money put down for the payment is sole and separate, that you're disclaiming all interest in the property and all future interest in the property. There was that issue went through our Court of Appeals because prior to recent rulings, they would just split the equity in half because it was bought during the marriage. Well, it went through the Court of Appeals, and they were like, well, you're basically null and voiding what you're signing, and they want contracts to be enforceable. So they looked at the intent of the parties. You can't sign something saying one thing, intend another, right? So they allowed for us to enforce that portion of it. So it will remain the sole and separate property of the individual who is carrying the responsibility of the note and who is on the deed. Okay. Because there is a detriment because they're responsible for the debt. You're not on the note. You're not responsible for the debt, right? You're not on the deed, so you have no legal interest in the property. So with that said, there's a formula where you can assert an equitable lien on a percentage of the equity that was accumulated during the marriage, because again, it would be unfair for community money to pay down the mortgage but get absolutely zero entitlement out of it just because you're not on the note and deed, right?
Right.
So that was another important thing that we talked about, was understanding how not being on a deed will affect your interest in the property, because a lot of people don't realize that. They just thought, well, I bought it during the marriage, therefore half of it's mine, and that's not the case.
Right. And so what we're talking about is two different things: paying down the debt with community income and cash flow. And then the last part of what you said was the community equity based on the appreciation of the property during the time you're actually married.
Yes. So it's basically determining a calculation for how much the community is entitled to. Okay.
Right.
In a scenario where you're signing a disclaimer deed as a spouse, well, it is not your property. You only have a community lien on a portion of the equity that was accumulated because of the community. You're
Right.
not entitled to the property. You're entitled to some money out of the property, but it's usually not going
A
to be
much smaller
50%.
percentage.
It's going to be a
Yeah.
smaller percentage, correct?
Right. Now, we were talking about a client, not a client, but a different scenario where, maybe you want to get your own attorney and have your own trust, and having your own trust, is similar to you having a disclaimer deed. Um, but, if you have a family trust and you put it in the trust, then your spouse actually has entitlement as community property, right? If they're a beneficiary of the trust, right?
Yeah, we kind of talked about, I'll say this with the caveat of, I'm not a wills, trust, and estates attorney. Okay, so
Yeah.
whenever you're talking about wills, trusts, and estates, even though it kind of relates to divorces, I always defer to the more nitty gritty details of trust and stuff, because it's very contingent on how you set up your trust and how it will get divided during a divorce, right? Is it revocable trust? Is it irrevocable trust? Who the beneficiaries are? Is it an inheritance, right? Inheritances are usually the sole and separate property of whoever it is designated to. Um, you know, just because you receive an inheritance during the time that you're married doesn't mean that your spouse is entitled to that inheritance, right? Unless the person that gave it up was put it to the community, which is usually never the case, right? They
Right.
usually just put it to their child or whatnot. So, um, could a trust be divided during a divorce process? Yes, but it's going to be dependent on how you guys set up the trust.
Yeah. Little
Yeah,
disclaimer, we're always going to say, hire somebody specifically to get that information. Don't just go off of YouTube for vague details. Um, and that's kind of the point today is, if you're looking for somebody to employ for your particular situation, if you're looking to get married or divorced, check out the family law group. John can point you in the right direction. And it's all very custom tailored, just like loans and loan approvals are to your specific needs and wants and what you're trying to accomplish. And I would say spending a little bit of money up front will save you a lot of money on the back.
yeah.
Would you
Even
agree?
if it's just a conversation, like I tell people, like a prenup. I don't have a prenup, and I've been married once prior. I have a divorce under my belt. I'm currently married. I didn't make my current wife sign a prenup. I didn't even discuss a prenup with her, because for me it wasn't appropriate. It wasn't a right fit for me, even though it could serve an eventual purpose. Like I didn't have money when I started dating my current wife. Like I wasn't rich. I came off of another divorce. I wasn't even licensed to practice law yet at that time. And she was, she helped me financially. She was there for me. So for me, it didn't make sense to do a prenup because one, I didn't have a ton of assets at the time that we were going to get married, and two, I would have, even if I had assets at that time, if I was with her prior to and we built something together, I just didn't feel right making her sign a prenup because that's not what our relationship called for at that time. But I definitely do encourage people to communicate.
Yeah.
There, you can invalidate prenups and things like that by not doing the right things leading up to someone even signing a prenup. So, like I had a case where I represented a person to review a prenup. Usually, we recommend that both sides have their own attorneys, a drafting attorney for the prenup, and then a reviewing attorney for the other side. In this particular scenario, I was a reviewing attorney, and he presented the prenup to her on the eve of them getting married. Like I'm talking like a week prior to. They had a big wedding set up in another country. All the family was coming, and basically said either sign this prenup or we're not getting married. Well, that type of scenario is a very reason why
Stressful.
a very reason a prenup can get invalidated, right? Because you basically coerce them into signing it because of the embarrassment of not getting married. So in those scenarios, you definitely don't want to do it. Um, just openly communicate. Like finances are important. Like every couple is going to have to deal with financial issues. And if the sooner you have that conversation, the easier it is to have it in general, and the less conflict there will be because expectations are set. And it might be difficult to broach the subject, but you're getting married. So
If you
being
can't talk about it before, you're
if you
right.
can't have a tough conversation with your spouse, you probably shouldn't be getting married, right?
Right.
Have those
Yeah.
tough conversations throughout the entirety of your marriage. It's not all sunshine, butterflies, and rainbows, right? You're going to have tough conversations. You're going to have disagreements, but you're going to have to effectively communicate through those disagreements.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fantastic advice. Where are you guys located? How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so we have 4 locations, 2 brick and mortar locations. The other 2 locations are for like virtual consults like this, or telephonic consults. Those 2 locations are Peoria and Scottsdale. Our brick and mortar locations are one's in Central Phoenix. It's basically Central in Earl, which is right between Thomas and Indian School on Central, and Central Ave. And then our secondary locations in the East Valley were in Gilbert, and that location is off of cross streets are Cooper and Guadalupe.
Awesome. Yeah, congrats. How long have you been open there now?
The East Valley location since October of last year, so things are going well. We have a
God,
great
was that
people.
over a year ago?
Yeah, no, well, approaching a year.
My
It,
last year's just flown by, but I remember the open house invite, and
yeah, it's going great, man. There's a big need for our services out here, which is why we came out here.
that's awesome.
But yeah, we offer free consultations. So if there's any family law issues, juvenile law issues, domestic relations, etc., that you want to get advice on, or give us a call. Our consultations are free. A lot of places charge quite a bit of money for consultations, but we enjoy meeting with people, giving them good advice on different aspects of their case, and giving them knowledge so that they can make an appropriate decision on how to proceed.
Awesome. I'll make sure I get the phone number in there, but if they're watching, what's the phone number?
Yeah, phone number is 480-300-6012, and our website is www.thevalleylawgroup.com.
Awesome. And one last question I love to ask, just to kind of throw you off and end on a good note. But if you could have a billboard and put anything on it, let's say it's off of I-10 near Central Phoenix, what would you put on that billboard and why?
What would I put on the billboard? Well, one, my face.
Definitely your face.
Brand identity. I want the name of the firm and the affiliation to be of the business owner. So I guess myself and Ryan. But I would you know for family law, you don't see a whole lot of billboards
Yeah.
out there. So I would probably want them to associate my law firm name with helping individuals with family issues.
Yeah.
So that's probably what I would tailor it with, not like Rafi, where I'm like putting my name in. Like
That's funny
no,
you said that because I was going to say something to that effect too, but I think accident law and a bunch of other stuff like that. Um, it's you guys deal with an emotional side of law and kids and families coming together and not and
yeah,
you're
yeah.
you're a good guy and you're helping a lot of families.
I definitely want people to associate the need for help in family law cases, because a lot of times people come in too late, where they kind of just hurt themselves by not getting the help that they needed when it could have actually helped them.
Yeah,
We get people in there where they'll get a final order, and the order is just blatantly not in their favor. And they try to get us to invalidate orders and things like that, but it's already too late because they didn't get the appropriate, information and help that they needed prior to.
so invest a little time and energy in it up front. Um, it's always good to get your own counsel, I
Yep.
would say, somebody who's got your back.
Exactly, and time and energy is what you said. But a lot of reasons why people don't do it is financial. But I think of my services as an investment. Really,
Right.
you spend the money because it's worth it. To be frank.
Well, and spend the money to have the conversation, create a space where you can get a lot of this stuff out. Like if you need a prenup or want to do something like that, you know, if if you can't talk to them about those things before and you're not on the same page, you probably shouldn't be entering into an agreement like that. But
Yeah, I mean the detriment of not paying, whatever the cost of whatever attorney you're going to use could be substantial to what you opt to lose if
yeah,
you don't appropriately set that
right.
boundaries in place. So
Is there anything from our prior conversation or anything you've thought of now, something you'd like to add before we let you go?
yeah, I just mentioned it in briefly. we talked about prenuptial agreements, which is prior to marriage, but you can also do postnuptial agreements. Okay, so don't think that because you're already married, you're just out of luck and contracting for how you want things done. Okay, in contemplation of a divorce, so you can definitely enter into agreements after marriage as well, to help combat certain issues. And sometimes it could be hard to have that after that conversation after you're already married, but your circumstances change too. So what you thought and prior to getting married and what exists now, those circumstances could be entirely different, which calls for a need or a reason or uh, some type of conversation happening to discuss you know things like debt division, asset division, etc.
So what that brings to mind for me is, usually you have in the partnership, one partner has a very strong personality and one partner may have a less strong personality. And I think what we're saying is like just have the faith and be an advocate for yourself for getting whatever those terms are, or speak up for whatever you need in order to make it work. I just speaking from personal experience, I thought, I needed to go with the flow and everything, and I didn't speak up. And I think there's always at least one party that doesn't want to advocate for themselves. And I want to encourage, if you're watching this, to advocate for yourself with what you want, because if you want to stay in it, they gotta know. You gotta communicate with them what they need to know to make it work for you. And if they don't know, how can they help? So
Exactly. Yeah, I like the words advocate for yourself. You do. Like, even if you're like the stay-at-home spouse, you need to advocate for yourself too and understand, in contemplation of a divorce, if that's the route that it's going, that, you know, where does that leave you? You've been unemployed for, 5 years taking care of the children. You're not gainfully employed at the time that you might be going through a divorce process. Um, and you're going to have to restart your life, and while the other spouse is gainfully employed, has assets, etc. So yes, being an advocate for yourself is going to be important, and hiring an attorney can also help in the sense that they can advocate for you.
right,
Yeah.
awesome, man. Well, I think this is some awesome content. I hope somebody that needed to hear this is watching. And if you have any specific questions, uh, please feel free to reach out, make a phone call, schedule a consultation with the Valley Law Group and Jonathan Roeder. And if you have any questions about buying a house or getting qualified, you're going into a new relationship, you're either getting married or getting divorced, I'd be more than happy to help you navigate that situation, because it's definitely very emotional. There's a lot of finance and balancing that goes into that, and we're here for you. So thank you so much for your time, Jonathan. You're awesome.
All right, Sean, thanks for having me. Take care.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.